Good afternoon and welcome to today's convocation. I am Don Smith, a 7-year member of the Board of Trustees. I'm in my COVID year this year. It's my great pleasure and privilege to host today, and I'm welcoming the Reverend Elizabeth Gibbs Zehnder, chaplain at LA County USC Medical Center, as our speaker for today. Let us hear a reading from the prophet Jeremiah as our scripture for today. The harvest is past, the summer is ended, and we are not saved. For the hurt of my poor people, I am hurt, I mourn, and dismay has taken hold of me. Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no physician there? Why then has the health of my people not been restored? Will you pray with me, please? Almighty, merciful God, how many times during this pandemic have we needed to join Jeremiah in anguished lament? Is there no balm in Gilead? Why then has the health of my people not been restored? And like Jeremiah, we are not comforted knowing that our own human frailties and willfulness only prolong the crisis. But there is a balm for our wounded spirits. People all around us are stepping up to serve in heroic and amazing ways. God, lend your strength to all those who were there for us in times of crisis, fear, and hurt. People like Reverend Elizabeth Gibbs Zehnder. You give courage to the first responders who continue to do this important work they are called to do, looking beyond the risk for the sake of those who need your help and protection. We give you thanks for the many ways they give of themselves, their skills, knowledge, and help in troubling times. Protect them, O Lord. Extend your shielding hand over them and comfort their hearts when they are tired and heartbroken. God, we also lift up prayers and thanksgiving and comfort for the families of first responders and all who support them. We pray these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. It is a privilege to introduce to you my longtime colleague, Reverend Elizabeth Gibbs Zehnder. I had to go back and look, and Elizabeth has been serving as the Presbyterian chaplain at LA County USC Medical Center since February of 2015. Time flies, eh, Elizabeth? She left her position at Emmanuel Presbyterian Church on Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles to accept this position, and we're very glad that she did. If you think it's an easy thing to be chaplain at LA County USC Medical Center, I'm sure she's going to disabuse us of that notion. But I want to make you aware of something else. Presbyterians have had a chaplaincy at LA County USC Medical Center for over 60 years. And I've had some experience in oversight of several of those chaplains. Elizabeth is a gem. And one of the ways she really shines is that she has to answer to a lot of different bosses. I chair the consortium that oversees the chaplaincy for Presbyterians, and that is made up of 4 presbyteries: San Fernando, San Gabriel, Pacific, and Los Ranchos, as well as the Synod. In addition, she is a part of the Department of Pastoral Care at LA County USC, and therefore answerable to the director of the Department of Pastoral Care there, Father Chris Pinette. And in addition, on top of that layer, there's LA County and the Department of Public Health. And my goodness, not everyone can handle that kind of complexity and layers of authority, but Elizabeth, you shine at that, and that is not that is not a small thing. She has, over the course of her time there, she has developed an expertise in palliative care, and has earned the trust of her colleagues in the Department of Spiritual Care as liaison between that department and the Palliative Care Department. And so it is my great pleasure to introduce to you the Reverend Elizabeth Gibbs Zehnder.
Oh, thank you, John. What a lovely introduction. I'm so pleased and grateful to be with you all this afternoon. I wish that it could be in person. I'm pretty sure that's how every speaker probably begins. But it's so good to see your faces and read the names of so many familiar colleagues and friends. So thank you so much for the invitation today. I'm just going to jump right in because there are so many stories to tell. I want you to know that as I tell stories and include personal details, I have provided privacy for the patients whose stories I'm telling. So just know that HIPAA policies are being observed. I wonder, you all are like in the backyard of the county hospital there in Monte Vista Grove. I wonder how many of you, and you can raise your hand, either like with your real hand or your Zoom hand, how many of you have been to the county hospital, either as a patient or as a minister visiting one of your parishioners or visiting a loved one? Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of hands. It's one of those places that is rare in Los Angeles. I think that it really is an intersection for a big proportion of the human family here in Los Angeles County. There's not a lot of places in LA where so many people walk onto that campus from so many different walks of life. As many of you know, LAC USC Medical Center is a new hospital. It opened in 2008. And when they did that, they built 631 beds in the inpatient tower. And there's 150 beds in the emergency department. It's a level 1 trauma center. So that means there's a helipad, is that what they call it, on the roof? So the trauma helicopter lands and brings people there from all over Southern California. It's the hospital where the inmates in the county jail get their medical care. And it's a safety net hospital, which means that if somebody doesn't have other options for medical care, they won't be turned away from the county hospital. And as the challenge for our neighbors experiencing homelessness grows, this is their hospital. This is the place where they get care. As Don mentioned, there are 4 presbyteries and 1 synod that come together to make this position possible. And it is part of Presbyterian legacy in Southern California, bearing witness to God's love and light for the human family here. Whenever there is a Presbyterian person in the house, I make every effort to see them. And whenever there's a parishioner or a friend of yours there, please tap me and let me know. But the fact of the matter is that Presbyterians are not the largest demographic at the county hospital. We send a chaplain there because we recognize that to be alone on the worst day of your life without a reminder of God's love and human kindness is not something we want to see happen on our watch. So we conspire. We conspire to make sure that there is, as much as possible, someone there for our neighbors in need. So I count it a great privilege to serve in this ministry. I want to share with you some of the dimensions of chaplaincy at the hospital. And again, as Don mentioned, when I'm at the campus, I'm the lead with the palliative care team. I also am the lead in a medical surgical area, which sees all kinds of patients. I also am responsible for one of the units in the emergency department. And at all times, I'm part of a team that's on call to respond to a need for spiritual care in any part of the hospital. It's a very fluid situation, which makes it a very interesting and wonderful place to do ministry. I would like to share with you some reflections that have been prompted for me by COVID. And I'm sure, as for many of you, COVID has been a very rigorous teacher for me these last 18 months. So I'm going to be techie in this moment and attempt to share my screen with you so that I can show you some things. COVID has played out differently in every hospital. Certainly, as again, Don mentioned so eloquently, there are many bosses when you work at a county hospital. And the state has laid down some rules around how hospitals have operated, but then the local administration also has made decisions. At LAC USC, chaplains were decided to be part of the frontline staff. So we continued to visit patients during the height of the winter surge and all the way through the pandemic. Thankfully, there was plenty of protective equipment. We weren't one of the hospitals that suffered from that challenge, but we were, as chaplains, very much frontline, especially when medical interventions had been exhausted and the only care that was able to be offered was comfort care. This is a photograph of one of the boards that popped up in the hospital. And I imagine that you might have had a similar experience at Monte Vista. In those early days of the pandemic, there was just such an equal measure of fear of the change and hope that this COVID business would pass over us in 2 weeks and we'd be rid of it. And it seemed like there was a new safety protocol or a new way of doing things every other day. And we just kept hearing the numbers of cases go up and up and up. And it was in that climate that chaplains were providing support not only to patients and their families, but to our fellow coworkers at the hospital. This board, in one of its variations, sprung up next to the cafeteria. And it's on purpose a little blurry, by the way, because I wanted to protect some privacy of folks. But it's a place where people began posting pictures of colleagues of ours who died from COVID. And you can tell, like, it's kind of scrappy. It obviously wasn't put out by the HR department. It was a work of people who were giving their heart and soul to the work of caring for our community at great personal risk. And the board has grown over time. At one point, it was the focal point of a hospital-wide memorial service. There's 10,000 people that work at the hospital. And we had a time of collective grief and mourning at the 1-year anniversary mark. But then, it gets awkward. You're like, what do we do with this? Like, you can't take it down, but you can't leave it up forever. Like, can you make a scrapbook? Still seems a little unclear, so they parked it right next to the chaplain office. So I walk by this board on the daily, like very regularly. And it reminds me that we are living in that already not yet place with COVID. It's getting better, but it's still circulating. I keep getting notices that other colleagues at the hospital have come down with COVID. And every time I walk by this board, I'm reminded not only of their mortality, but my own mortality. Time is short. COVID has taught me to live well in each day, in each conversation. It takes willingness, fortitude, knowledge, skill, and a deep trust in spirit to go into these dark places as both witness and companion. No doubt you know that this is true from your own lived experience with COVID and in ministry and life over the years. But COVID has clearly made this more front and center. Because the hospital is a safety net hospital, as I mentioned, that means that many of the patients that come to the hospital are sicker and younger than one might expect. We've noticed, particularly on the palliative care team, that our emotional distress as we care for patients tends to rise whenever the average age of the patients in our care falls, meaning it's harder to care for young people that are sick beyond their years. I remember there was a family of a young father, and him and his wife and his 4 kids, all of them perfectly healthy, minding their own business. Everybody in the house got COVID. And then within 2 weeks, the dad was in our hospital on the ventilator. And as you might know with COVID, one of the side effects sometimes is that a person's lungs just become too hard to expand and contract and work properly. And so the hospital allowed his wife and his mother, only 2 visitors, both of them women full of deep faith who were praying for a miracle. Only 2 of them were allowed to come up to the ICU to say goodbye for 15 minutes through the glass. And the nursing staff has been tremendous. They set up a FaceTime tablet so that they could have a camera view of his face. And they connected with that tablet with their cell phone so that he could hear their voice through the closed door. And they wept, of course, right? They wept and they fell to their knees and they called out to God for miracles and for God's mercy. And the RN set up a privacy screen around us to give them some dignity. And no one else in the unit was able to stop. Everyone else continued to do what they were doing. The roar of the HEPA filter muffled their cries, and no one had a moment to spare, to pause, to mourn, to stand with them, because they were so busy caring for other patients, other COVID patients. And so all that was left was for me to stand with them, to pray with them, to witness the suffering of their loved one and their own suffering, and to witness God's presence with them. Because the hospital is a level 1 trauma center, it means that, practically speaking, the front door of the hospital is not the architectural pretty door, it's the emergency room. That's the door that most of our patients come through. Nobody really plans to have a stay at the county hospital. And COVID really heightened this dynamic, the way it so quickly would overtake people who normally wouldn't be even under the care of a doctor. And I would hear from these family members the way that COVID had sort of burned its way through their family, like maybe mom brought it home from work, and then boom, everyone in the household got it. And housing prices in LA, so everybody living pretty close quarters. And then, oh, the kids are fine now, but grandma's getting better. And now the aunt, she had gotten better, but she still can't really walk down the block without needing to catch her breath. I remember speaking on the phone with a young man, and this is something we did and we still do. We offer Tele-Chaplaincy. So if a person can't get to the hospital themselves, or if as a family member, there's another reason why they shouldn't be allowed to come in. Maybe they also have COVID or also have a contagious situation. We'll provide spiritual support on the phone. So the doctors had just told this young man that his mom, who was suffering from COVID, was really not looking good, and her time was short. And so the doctor asked me to reach out to the son. And when I spoke to him, he was just in shock. He was a young man. He was trying to decide, like, oh, do I take my final exams next week, or do I reach out to my professors and ask for an extension? And he was just spinning on this decision. And I was like, let's just take a beat here. Like, did you hear? Tell me what the doctors were saying. And he stopped and he apologized to me, the sweet young man. He said, "I'm sorry, Chaplain. It's just that my mom took care of all of this when my grandma got sick and died last month. Now my mom's dying, and I don't really know how to do this for her. I'm not even exactly sure where I'm going to stay, because this apartment was in my grandmother's name, and she's gone." I've noticed that it's even more intense to offer spiritual care in those places when it's just on the phone. And so we held silence for a while, because it was just too big to find words for it. And then I asked him who has his back, like who are his friends, who knows what's going on. And mercifully, he was able to name some people, and we began to pray. We prayed that God would make a way for him, that God would sustain him in this upside down world that he was finding himself in. I'm not sure how many different visitor policies you've had at Monte Vista Grove, but the hospitals had several. One more restrictive than the next, frankly. Other hospitals have had different policies, but because our patient population has suffered so much from COVID, they've been very strict. Right now, if you have a vaccine or a recent COVID test, you're allowed in, but if not, you're not able to come and see. And even when you are allowed in, it's for very limited time and very limited family members, just two. And this has been something that has really highlighted for me the importance of family and friends in the healing journey of our patients. And without the ability to have family and friends at bedside, it's really upped the game for chaplains to be surrogate family, surrogate friends, to be a person at the bedside who doesn't come to perform some medical act, but comes to acknowledge the humanity of what's happening. I would often get calls from the doctors, actually. The doctors would notice that this is what the patient needed. And because their family wasn't able to be there, they would call the chaplains. And they would ask us to reach out to the family and reach out to the patient. And of course, that's what we're going to do. So I would call the family and understand a little bit about what's happening. And usually the patients would be in very strict isolation. So here is what it looks like to have a friendly chaplain/alien visit you in your COVID room. So when the family when I'd conclude with the family, then I would prepare to go in the room. And it involves putting on a pair of gloves, a gown, a hair covering, goggles, an N95, a face shield, another pair of gloves, and going into the room. And sometimes I'd be able to have a tablet so that the family could continue to join in the visit and we could share in a time of prayer. Other times that just wouldn't work for one reason or another. But the real bottom line was for the patient to know that they're not alone, that they're not just an object receiving medical care, but that they're a person who is struggling for their very life. And I know that my voice was muffled. And I tell you, I spend like more than half of my day in Spanish, and try as I might, I've got a heavy accent. So that plus the mask definitely made a lot of communication challenges. But just holding their hand and stroking their forehead, and letting them know that someone was there, that God had not forgotten them, that humanity had not forgotten them, and to have the opportunity to share with them how much their family loved them and was praying for them. It was powerful to break into that space, not with a spirit of fear, but a spirit of deep trust in what God was doing in that place on both sides of the glass, with the patient and with their family and with the staff. I join with many of you in giving thanks to God for the vaccine and the other treatments that have been developed. Those things have saved many lives. And the reality is that COVID's still with us and continues to be very challenging to treat once it's taken hold in our bodies. And again, COVID is a wonderful teacher, as with so many of the terminal illnesses that plague our patients, our young patients. Liver disease, diabetes, cancer, heart failure, hypertension, poverty and stress conspire to make these very serious illnesses shorten the lives of our siblings in the human family here in Los Angeles. So, of course, as a hospital, we aggressively draw on all the treatments and therapies known to Western medicine, and there are many of those, to try and slow the progress of these diseases and conditions, and to ease the symptoms and the suffering of our patients. But in the end, our patients and their families are forced to confront their mortality much sooner than anyone else expected. It's challenging. It's challenging as a chaplain to know how to pray with folks in that situation. As a Christian, we know in our living and in our dying, we belong to God. But let's be honest, we always want it to be more on the living side. We want a little bit more time with those we love, a little bit more of the life that God has so graciously lent us. We just want a little longer. And so COVID has really taught me how to choose that path of praying not only for a cure, but for healing. Now, I want to unpack that a little bit with you. I mean, prayer for a cure, as a family or patient asks me, I pray for a cure. I pray for that stage 4 cancer to dissolve, for those stem cells to work, for the liver to be healed, for the COVID-riddled lungs to be flexible again and expand with oxygen. I mean, this is our prayer for a miracle. This is Lazarus walking out of the tomb. This is the widow's son leaping up off of that funeral procession, or Jairus' daughter being restored to life. This is squarely part of our Christian heritage, to pray for cure. And alongside that prayer, I pray for healing. I pray for healing, for God to enter in and to knit together those things that have been torn apart by this illness, by the wear and tear of life, by the trauma of what's happened before. And I pray for that healing at every level, physically, emotionally, spiritually, for this patient to be released from their suffering, for the son to forgive his mother, for the addict to repent and apologize for the pain they've caused their partner and children, for the adult children to stand in a circle around their beloved Father and thank him for the faithful example of God's love that he has been to them. I pray for the love and the peace of God to dwell in the hearts of the patient and in every one of their family members, that they will know at the very core of their being, they are not alone in their hour of need. This is healing. I believe that this is the prayer that COVID has taught all of us to pray these past 18 months. And as those who seek to follow Jesus, we have learned again and again that it does take our willingness and our fortitude, our knowledge and our skill, and our deep trust in spirit to go into those dark places and be the witness and be the companion that's needed. So I know I have shared a lot and a lot of heavy things with you, but I know that this isn't your first time to the rodeo. So many of you know firsthand what it is to encounter suffering and find God's grace and mercy there, and to see the ways in which God transforms trauma into a space of healing. And so I am looking forward to the space for conversation. I wonder what questions or thoughts you all have and would like to share. So I see, Lynn, look at you go. Oh, that's very sweet, Lynn. Thank you. Let's see, given the crushing weight, anxiety and grief you've been bearing now through this pandemic, what is sustaining you? Oh my goodness. That is a great question, Lynn. I have really found it helpful to do the basics, to really watch what I eat, make sure I'm sleeping, make sure I'm exercising, not watch crappy television and things that fill my mind with less than edifying thoughts, and to really give myself some grace to be tired, and to honor that and trust that when I come to the end of what I can do, that is going to be enough, and that God will employ someone else to carry the ball down the field. The other thing that I find very sustaining is the patients. Their courage and their faith and their witness is beyond. It is, it's incredible. It's very amazing just to sit at their feet and receive their wisdom and get a glimpse of a life well lived in faith and service. So yeah, and it's a work in progress, by the way. So any thoughts on that matter, I'm always welcome those. Let's see, Nancy, do any COVID patients discuss with you their vaccination choices? Not so much. When I speak with COVID patients, it's pretty late in the game. And so if they've made a choice for a vaccine and they're dealing with a breakthrough case, that's like beyond rare in our hospital. What's more common is someone who didn't have a vaccine and is regretful of that. Either, yeah, but the horses already are out of the barn at that point, by the time I'm really encountering somebody, just because of the way our hospital's set up. A patient needs to be pretty ill before they're admitted. So those are the only kind of discussions I really get with folks around their vaccine choices.
Hi, everybody. Just want to interject. You now have permission for unmute your microphones. So audience, feel free to jump in and ask if you like, or you can continue in the chat box. Thanks.
Pat got a question in just under the wire. How is your palliative care unit set up and how big is it? Oh, that's a great question. The way palliative care is organized at the county hospital is it's not an actual address. It's a list of patients that have been referred for palliative care, and they're located all over the hospital so that they can get the specialized care that they need. So for example, a palliative cancer patient will be on the oncology unit, while a palliative liver patient would be on the liver unit. So the census varies between 15 to 30 patients, I'd say, a day. And it's a very dynamic list. Folks are ideally able to be, well, obviously, their symptoms managed and their life prolonged. But when that's not possible, we work really hard to get them to the place they most want to be. And that's usually not in the hospital. And then when it is in the hospital, we have we have some comfort care rooms where the comfort of the patient's prioritized. And I guess that's the other place where the palliative patients would be. Hearing none from the floor, I'm going to go with another question from the chat. Medical professionals at the county, how are they doing? How long can their stamina hold up? You know, your prayers would be really appreciated. It's been not just a marathon. It's been like an Ironman. I don't even know what's worse than an Ironman, but it might be that. I think it just is this never-ending thing where it seems like the finish line keeps getting bumped down the road. And the latest challenge is really around the vaccine mandates. As is the human nature, there's a lot of opinions about getting vaccines and whose decision that is and how we all work through that together. And folks are pretty afraid. They're very weary. A lot of folks who were close to retirement made that decision to retire. And so it's been difficult to recruit adequately to fill in the ranks. So that would be a really great category of people to have on your prayer list. Tom, are you raising your hand?
I am. I am. Welcome to the convocation here at the Grove. It's wonderful to see you, for crying out loud.
It's lovely to see you.
Dealing with obviously a very heavy and distressing process. Over the years, I often felt that my Roman Catholic colleagues had at least one leg up on me with regard to the reality of death, because they had last rites. A variety of, shall I say, of prayers and actions that affirmed the reality of death, imminent death or death soon to come. And I found that sometimes Roman Catholics that I encountered sometimes had a greater peace with regard to the end of their lives as a result of some of those ministrations. Whereas as a Protestant, I often felt, gotta pray for healing here, gotta pray for wholeness, and gotta pray for restoration. Now, maybe that was just me, but my sense is that Protestants are not quite as well, shall I say, liturgically equipped to acknowledge that moment when the medical effort only prolongs the reality of death and may in fact increase suffering. I'm just wondering, Elizabeth, for you, at what point, how do you cross that line when you know that death is imminent and is coming, and begin to practice your own Protestant last rites of assurance and penance and welcome?
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question, Tom. I think for me, since it's definitely folks from a lot of different backgrounds in the Christian households, and there's different backgrounds in the Christian household, and then there's different degrees of orthodoxy within their own practices. I usually, and time is often short by the time I'm brought to the bedside. So I will usually ask the patient, if possible, that's rare, or the family present, to center for us what is most important. And they will often populate that with, oh, I don't want mom to suffer anymore. I don't want death to hurt my son. I want my grandmother to be reunited with her son who died in infancy. I mean, the family will name what is most important to them about the crossing, and then that really sets me up to provide a prayer that engages that dimension of passing from this life to the next. But then I can also include some of the other things that are rich in our tradition about, a final forgiveness and being received as a sheep of the flock, and into God's eternal rest and comfort for the family. So I do find that having someone outside the circle of the family able to serve in that priestly role is of great comfort, whether or not the family has a liturgical bent or not. I think they often appreciate that sense that someone is spiritually guiding and helping their person move from this life to the next. Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to take the next one in the chat. Once a patient leaves the hospital or the family loses a family member, is there any follow-up done with them by you or others? Ooh. Honestly, not a ton. With the palliative patients, because we do develop a little bit more history and relationship, I will call the family and offer my condolences. But on the regular, that is not part of the scope of our practice at the hospital. There's too many folks coming in the emergency room. But we do, when someone does die, there is a packet of resources that tries to create some pathways for families to get, follow-up support either with their congregation or parish or, whatever matches their tradition. But no, we're not able to provide much of the follow-up there. I see. Bill, yes.
Elizabeth, just a week ago, we got word from our son Scott that his brother-in-law, who was in a ministry in Orange County, and his wife were in the hospital, and the brother-in-law, Jim Adkins, had just died. Both of them were there with COVID. And Marlene is struggling a great deal. Her oxygen level, she's still alive and may recover, but some of Jim's last words when he was able to speak, get the vaccine, get the vaccine. It's just tragic. Seems just a needless loss. Nevertheless, do you have, are there any times you're able to talk with where a patient, COVID patient in the hospital is able to actually communicate with you anything that they say? Is there anything like that?
Oh, yes. And I should clarify, most of the stories I shared with you were about patients who had COVID that were already intubated, already on the ventilator for breathing support. But actually, the way we work it at the county hospital, when folks come in through the ED with COVID symptoms, everybody who comes into the hospital is tested. But some people show up to the hospital with a COVID symptom, and they're sort of tracked and assessed. And if they're able to go home on home oxygen, they're not even let in the hospital. They just pivot right out of the parking lot to a home oxygen program, which has been amazing because it's really kept up the bandwidth in the hospital, but it also lets people be in a place where they're most comfortable. You know, who wants to be isolated in the hospital? You know, you want to be in your own bed. So the patients that are admitted are quite sick, but not necessarily on a ventilator. So like for today's example, there was 39 COVID patients, and I think 18 of them were not intubated, which means they are able to speak theoretically. Now, some of them are too tired or too sick to do that. And some of them, actually, what's another interesting thing is some of them come because they were in a car accident and they get tested because everybody gets tested. And they're like, oh, by the way, you have COVID, but they're not symptomatic. So they're not in the hospital for their COVID. They're in the hospital because their leg is shattered. But the conversations I've had with COVID patients that are able to speak has mostly been centered around the way in which COVID is such a roll of the dice that it comes into the household and you just can't tell who is going to be flattened by it, who's going to bounce back, who's going to die, who's going to not even get a symptom. Like, it's just impossible to guess. And what extra grief that causes people, because we love our families and nobody wants to be the one that brings COVID home. And yet people have to work, they have to care for each other, they have to live under the same roof, and there's only so much that can be done. So I guess that would be more the theme that characterizes my conversations with the COVID folks who are able to speak.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, yes, Catherine. Oh, I think you might be muted, Catherine.
How are you?
Oh, it does my heart good to see you.
Thank you. Same here. I was just wondering, because I had a friend who went to the hospital, not the county hospital, for another problem, medical problem. And while there, contacted COVID.
Oh.
So can you kind of share with us if that's happening a lot at the county USC hospital?
I don't know. There have been some patients whose day, it's so tricky. Like, you get into the weeds, right? Of like, who was exposed, when they're exposed, when did the symptoms show up? There's a delay. Did they get COVID outside and bring it in, or did they get it from the hospital staff? So I mean, it can get murky, but yes, I do know of some patients whose stay in the hospital was longer than the incubation period. And when they came in, they didn't test positive. So you're like, I think that happened. But it's been rare in my experience.
Well, that's good. That's good.
And deeply, my heartfelt sympathy with your friend, because what a horrible thing. I know a lot of folks stayed away from the hospitals early on in the pandemic out of fear of that very thing. And actually that's been another cruel twist is a lot of the folks who deferred care, like didn't get that lump checked out in their breast or didn't follow up on that high blood sugar test, some of those conditions that are definitely more manageable early on became crisis health concerns a year later. And then the risk of going to the hospital felt less than it did at the very beginning of the pandemic. But it's been such a horrible calculation for people to have to make. Like, do I risk getting COVID in the hospital, or do I risk my blood sugar getting out of control, or whatever it is, the ailment they're trying to manage? Awesome. Sandra, yes.
Hello, dear friend. You've kind of referred to this in a general way, but can you tell us any specific ways that we can pray for you and your family? Is there anything actual, corporal, real, physical that we can do to hold you up in all this completely overwhelming work that you're doing for us every day?
Oh, Sandra, thank you. And yes, definitely there were moments, and I'm sure there will continue to be moments, where I really felt at the end and of my strength or my wisdom or my anything. And I really felt the prayers of folks carrying and sustaining me. So please pray for strength and for wisdom and discernment as I'm participating in the chaplaincy ministry. There's a team of us. So if you want to just make it a broad prayer for all of us, that's great. And I really would appreciate prayer for my family. They're at risk because of what I do, and I don't want to be that mom that brings COVID home. And we're all vaccinated, thank God, but breakthrough COVID's real. So prayers for that. And I would say, and not only prayers for the physical protection of our health, but our mental and spiritual well-being. This pandemic is taking a toll on all of us. And I would appreciate prayers for God's mercy and provision with that. Thank you, Sandra. Let me just see.
Elizabeth, there's one in the chat.
Oh.
Sorry, my camera's not on. There's one in the chat from Lynn. She says, it seems the burden of this pandemic has largely fallen on those of you in hospitals. Are there ways, along with prayer, that we who are a step removed from the trenches might do to support you and those who show up every day in the war zone of COVID?
Yes. Yes. Pray. I mean, the top three answers are pray, 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 pray. And then as many engaging conversations you can have with people in your life to talk through vaccine decisions and practices that promote good hygiene. You know, flu season's coming, and that's no joke. And we got a pass last year, but those it's nothing fancy, but like the masks and the hand washing and the thinking about how big's the room, how many people are in it, how close are we, just continuing to make normative those questions so that we can remain well. Every person who doesn't come to the hospital, doesn't need to come to the hospital, means that there's an ICU bed there for the person who has to come. So those are very real ways that we as a community can move the needle on reducing the number of people who are sick and keeping our capacity for intense hospital treatment available to those who have no control over the circumstance of their being in need of that hospital, those hospital resources. So yes, but pray. Like then, yeah, the last thing is pray. Just keep praying. Any work being done with medical professionals, extraordinary trauma. cared for spiritually and emotionally, psychology. Yes.
Sorry, Elizabeth, I just want to read them out loud.
I didn't.
So the rest of the audience can also hear the question. From Lynn
Okay.
again, is there any work being done in the medical professionals who are themselves bombarded with extraordinary trauma every day? How are they being cared for spiritually and psychologically?
This has been one of the gifts of COVID, I must say. I mean, I want to recognize that every challenging situation has gifts in the mix. Not to say that the trauma is nothing, but one of the gifts has been making it more normative to talk about burnout and emotional, spiritual well-being as medical professionals. Our hospital has really amped up our programs that provide not only resources, but peer counseling, and just made it okay for super professional medical people to say, today, I can't keep it together. I can't do that family meeting today. I can't push through. I need to tap out. And that was unheard of before COVID. But I am hopeful that this is going to be something that will bear fruit and make it possible for people to be fully dedicated to a medical career without feeling as though they need to sacrifice their emotional and spiritual well-being to do so. So yes, there are more resources, not only coming online, but more willingness on the part of folks who are on the front lines to take advantage of them. So I think that is really wonderful. Very wonderful. Another question. Might there be some way to comfort those who regret not being vaccinated by providing a way for them to get their warning out as a final gift to others? Ooh, Nancy, what an interesting idea. Yeah, I think as a chaplain at the bedside one-on-one with someone, regret is one of the topics that I work through with folks. And try as we might, we all do live with a lot of regret for the words unspoken or the actions inflicted, and working through what amends we can make in the time that's left to us is definitely part of the emotional and spiritual work of dying. So definitely we try and offer comfort to folks when the decision they made is now bearing consequences that are out of anyone's control. I wonder about their families being the vehicle for those words, and that message. Someone was telling me about a Facebook or a subgroup on Reddit that is dedicated to that exact thing, of the Facebook pages of people who have posted their vaccine defiance, their entry to the hospital, and then their vaccine regret. I haven't seen it myself. I don't really know about Reddit yet, but I'm getting techier as we go. But that's a really interesting idea, Nancy.
We're just about at our time. Are there any final questions?
Not a question, but perhaps just a comment, and just to say thank you, Elizabeth, for not only giving us your time today, but for being who you are and for being who you are in that particular context. We love you. We support you. We are amazed by your grace. We are huge fans, and you've been added, I'm sure, to everyone who's been on this Convocations today, that you're permanent, you and yours, both family as well as your colleagues, are permanently on our prayer list from this day forward. So bless you.
Thank you, Lynn. Thank you.
I think we've come to our close there. Thank you, Lynn, for expressing on behalf of all of us our gratitude for a rich experience today. I think it's been valuable on so many levels, and thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank
My
you.
job.
I just want to say thanks to all of you. It's a heavy topic, and I trusted you all with a lot of emotional work as you heard these stories, and I'm so grateful for your companionship in this work. So thank you for the opportunity to share with you today.
And we continue to pray. Aware that it's not just you, but many staff in the hospital who really bear considerable burdens in this time.
The program next week, we have Jill Shook coming to talk to us.
Jill Shook is a good friend as well.
Yes. Say something about Jill Shook. That would be good.
Well, Jill Shook is a housing expert and advocate that is just amazing in the religious community of Pasadena in particular. A great, strong advocate for much needed housing, not only for the homeless, but for low-income people who are increasingly shut out. She comes with a great religious background with her partner, Anthony Manusos. That too should be a challenging and rich experience for you. Thank you to all, and God bless each one of you. This has been a great pleasure.